Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Earlier this year, I looked at the fourth series of the BBC Sherlock show, and I made no secret of my dislike for that show in general, and my preference for another Sherlock Holmes adaptation. Elementary is a series that airs on CBS, and up until this current TV season, where I started following The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow, Elementary was the only show I was really following aside from Supergirl. What's crazy is that when it came out, I was sure that I was gonna hate it. I was sure that just because Lucy Liu was playing Watson, that they'd force a stupid romantic arc between Sherlock and Watson, so I didn't even start watching until the third or fourth episode. And imagine my relief that as the show prepares to enter its sixth season next January, that we haven't been forced to sit through that, and to the creators and writers of that show, I thank you immensely for that. It's a bit of a rarity these days, but tie-in novels do exist in some capacity for newer shows, not just older material like Star Trek and Star Wars, though not every show gets them anymore. Elementary is one of the lucky ones to have some tie-in novels, including today's book, Blood and Ink. I actually didn't know that tie-in novels existed for Elementary until I got this book at Elementary's New York Comic-Con panel last year. What's weird about this is that this is a book based on a television series based on a book series from the late 1800s, so it's like it went full circle in terms of adaptation. Anyway, the book details Sherlock and Watson solving a crime in New York City that sounds like the solution of a game of Clue. The security analyst in the seedy motel room with the fountain pen. But is this worthy of being a Sherlock Holmes story? Let's find out. This is Blood and Ink. The cover is... okay, so you'd think that with what I said last week about photo covers on Star Trek books that I would be against this. Except I'm not. Not because I think that this is fine, but because Elementary doesn't have the history Star Trek had with great painting-like covers. For Elementary, this is fine. Sure, I'd prefer something made specifically for the book and not a random publicity shot of Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu, but for this, it's serviceable. Though if they were gonna go this route, I'd have preferred if they did something interesting with the logo. Maybe have the ink side be covered with red liquid and the blood side be covered in black liquid. Literal blood and ink. But that's just me. It's an okay cover, nothing special, but it does its job to show the characters, and you're not really reading this book on the merit of it being a great book with a great cover, you're reading it on the merit of it being a tie-in novel to one of your favorite shows. Let's get to the story. The book opens at the tail end of a case being solved by Sherlock and Watson involving a poisoned jar of preserves, in which the detectives are gifted the spoon from that jar as their reward. As they leave the site of the case, a ritzy hotel, they get a call from Captain Gregson summoning them to a much less reputable site of lodging, where naturally a dead body was found. That's sort of how all police procedurals work. Either a body is found, or a kidnapping occurs, or an assault happens. The only difference is that the cops weren't notified first, but security people from Mantis Capital Investments, a hedge fund, were the first to respond and are mucking about with the investigation. Sherlock finds the murder weapon, a fancy fountain pen from a company that makes expensive-as-hell pens, which lacks its cap, which means they can't track it down with the company since they don't have the serial number. What they do have is a victim that was a very secure CFO, who wanted everything documented, including all employee movements, meaning that they have a very detailed listing of where Gregory Smythe was in the weeks leading up to his untimely murder. They talk to the head of security and the CEO, who both tell them that Smythe was a brilliant security analyst and even better CFO. Sherlock also demands that Mantis Capital send him all their personnel records and records of everyone who's been in and out of the building in the past 6 years on paper, which ends up being just about the size of the naughty and nice lists from the first Santa Claus movie. Their studying of Smythe's apartment also tells them that Smythe wasn't a user of fountain pens, he preferred ballpoint, so the murder weapon belonged to the murderer and not Smythe, making it being left behind all the more strange. Watson and Sherlock discover that he had attended a lecture in Newark some weeks prior and was scheduled to attend another that night, and while Sherlock pores over the paper, Watson and Detective Bell go to the lecture given by one Dale Vanderpool, a motivational speaker whose books detail how to improve your life. At the lecture, during the book signing at the end, Watson and Bell overhear Vanderpool mention that he recently misplaced his fountain pen, and they decide to question him about Smythe, along with also questioning his staff, 2 roadies and Sophie and Trent Absalom, who handle the business side of things. They walk in on a heated argument between Trent and someone he's on the phone with, but they don't get any information from them about Smythe. What they do find out from Sherlock, though, is that Vanderpool is actually living under an alias, because earlier in his life he served 5 years in San Quentin for, you guessed it, murdering someone with a fountain pen to the eye. Though Sherlock isn't convinced that he's the murderer, based solely on the fact that it's such a perfect recreation of his initial crime, so it's probably someone who knew Vanderpool in his previous life. So Sherlock, Watson, Bell, and Gregson have to find Smythe's killer and help bring them to justice before anyone else is killed. After Trent is found murdered and they discover that Trent and Sophie are con artists, Sherlock calls in a favor from everyone, the hacker collective based on Anonymous that Sherlock often gets information from, for a price, and the price in this case is singing a medley of Monty Python songs in the nude on a live stream for them. The information he gets, however, is valuable, Sophie and Trent's real identities, which helps them track Sophie down and subsequently use her to find who they believe is the real brains of the operation, Dale's former cellmate from his prison stint, alias Vinnie Talbot. Finding out that it was much more than just Smythe, and that Talbot was engineering corporate espionage across the country, using stolen data to weave the market to his whims to manipulate stocks. With some surveillance footage from Trent's murder, coupled with Sophie's help, they track down Talbot, or Calvin Bennett, his alias being an anagram, with them almost losing him, before Watson threatens him with what he thinks is a gun poking into his back, but is actually the spoon from the earlier case. I love it when hanging plot threads are resolved. They bring him in, and he squeals on the head of the entire operation, the CEO and founder of Mantis Capital, Darcy Kellogg. See, she went to high school with Calvin, and when Mantis started to go under, she asked him for help to get the company back to its high status. Though the miracle was too miraculous, and Smythe noticed it, confronting Sophie at a Vanderpool lecture after he saw that Darcy attended one right before their numbers shot up, having recognized Sophie from a drop-off she had made at Mantis for Calvin. She told Calvin, and he promised Darcy that he'd take care of Smythe, and we all know what that means. Murder! And then Trent got skittish when the cops showed up, and that argument Watson overheard was Trent threatening to squeal, meaning he had to go as well. Darcy maintains that she didn't know anything about the murder and would never have sanctioned it, but they still take her away. The novel ends with Sherlock and Watson returning home, with Watson reflecting on how all the death came down to simple money, and Sherlock going back to returning to paying his debt to everyone, asking Watson to join in, but she declines. Come on, come on, come on! Yes! Oh, I caught a shiny. We'll be right back. Aw, who's the best little skidoo? You are. We're back. Pokemon and me is really addicting. I gotta stop playing Pokemon during the commercials. The author has a perfect handle on all of the characters from the show. I heard all the dialogue in the voices of the characters, and it all fit. Sherlock's mannerisms are down pat on the page. I could see Sherlock's subtle movements as he spoke, the way he moves his head, his body language. It's all down there in the text. Same with Watson. This was undeniably written in Lucy Liu's voice, especially how she, more so than Sherlock, was affected by all the needless death. She's always been the more compassionate one, whereas Sherlock just sees a job well done. Gregson and Bell are great too, and talk and act exactly like they do in the show. This isn't some shameless cash grab of a tie-in that just exists to make money. This is an episode of the show. Even the characters created for the book slot perfectly into the world. Since it's a reality-grounded show, the characters are relatively normal, but they don't feel out of place in the show's world at all. Every character in this is someone that we've seen on the show before. The CEO, the criminal, the con artist, the red herring. They're all pretty par for the course for Elementary, but the fact that the author didn't go overboard and throw in reality-breaking elements, which he totally could have since this is a novel, shows that he understands and is maybe even a fan of the show based on that. I didn't see the ending coming. I mean, I did, 'cause big business, but I didn't suspect the CEO due to her actions, only because of her position. I figured that there was some connection, but I actually suspected the security chief. Considering how pleasant and accommodating he was, I figured he was hiding something. She didn't really factor into anything aside from her brief talk during the interview, so I was genuinely shocked that she was the killer. I mean, technically the other guy was the killer, but she was the brains. I also really liked Dale Vanderpool because he was just a genuinely decent guy who admittedly made some mistakes, but he was trying his damnedest to atone for his past sins. I really felt for him when he detailed the murder he committed, self-defense by the way, and how he was really trying to turn his life around. I don't put much stock into motivational speakers or books that tell you how to succeed, but if that's what he has to do, more power to him. Sophie, I also felt for, despite her checkered past. She was really in over her head once the murder started. She was just in it for the payout, and she did seem to be really distraught and scared after Trent's murder, which is why she cooperated, and it really translated well into making me feel her emotions too, as if I could see her face and body language. We didn't get to see much of Trent, but he was decently written, as was Calvin Bennett, who we also didn't see much of, but when he was around before he got caught, he was a very sinister figure, and even more so after when we saw that he was the one willing to kill to save the scheme. The book has very good action, and the story unfolds at a decent pace. It's got the benefit of being able to be longer than a standard episode, and uses that longer time to really develop everything, and give us more than the usual for red herrings and false wins. The book really feels exactly as long as it needs to be, and nothing gets rushed through or feels like it goes on for too long. We get to capture all the suspects, and we get to learn their entire histories. Something we don't always get in the show, and it's appreciated here. If this was an episode, it would definitely be one that would need a bigger budget than they would normally give to a TV show. And we get a lot of tense, suspenseful moments too, like the sting operation to catch Calvin or when they track down Sophie. But it also balances that with comedy when Sherlock has to convince the manager of a pizza parlor to give them their surveillance footage. That balance is exactly as perfect as it is on the show. Plus, that bit where we start at the tail end of the case is brilliant as well, because it lets us start on a tense moment without having to dive straight into the murder investigation. We get to see Sherlock and Watson in action before the case officially starts, which lends itself to the nature of the book. And we get a lot of good bantering between them in that initial case and throughout the entire book. What I really like is that it also leaves a lot of clues to let the reader piece it together themselves, but hides them well enough that it doesn't bog down the story. We have a seemingly throwaway line about Sherlock ruminating on the records of Dale Vanderpool's prison sentence, which gives you the idea that someone who knew him was involved. And then there's Vanderpool's name being a combination of Dale Carnegie and his wife's maiden name, Vanderpool. Dale Carnegie's chosen profession? self-help lectures, just like Vanderpool. I enjoy trying to piece together the solution while I watch the show, so the fact that it's here made the book even better in my eyes. This book is fantastic. It captures not only the spirit of Sherlock Holmes, but also the spirit of the show to a T. What's great about it is that you don't really need to know anything about the characters to understand it. It's completely accessible to non-fans, which is great considering that a lot of tie-in material is how I got into a lot of franchises, just finding books at the library to read and liking it and then watching the show. The author, Adam Christopher, also wrote another Elementary book, and based on the reviews for that they put in the back of this book, I can only imagine that this level of brilliance is the same in that one too. In fact, a lot of what I said about this book is what other reviewers said about the previous book. It's just like an episode of the show, which is great, because it is exactly what I need during the off-season of the show, especially considering that the show isn't streaming anywhere and I need my fix. It's not a coincidence that I chose to review this book right when the show would usually be premiering its next season, which has been delayed to January for some reason this year. If you're a fan of Elementary and need that fix as well, I highly recommend this book. If you're not a fan for the reasoning of not liking the gender-swapped Watson because you think it's going to be all heteronormative romance, don't worry and check both this and the show out. But if you don't want to spend time on all the seasons and just want to start when the next one airs, this book will get you pretty up to speed with the basics of everyone's characters. But do check the show out. It's good too. And that was Elementary Blood and Ink. Was it good? Definitely. It's a great story, and while it's par for the course based on the show, it's still a highly enjoyable read that has a lot of good action and a lot of decent comedy. What other Sherlock Holmes book can you say contains the lines, Holmes had started shouting about the mighty Scots pine, and he was singing something about lumberjacks, and going to the lavatory? I rest my case. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. Oh, and if you want to be notified of new uploads, you can hit that bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next week for a review that's been a long time coming. Tell me, do you groan? You will. Watson and Sherlock discover that he had attended a lecture in Newark and was scheduled to attend another Watson and Sherlock discover that he had attended a lecture in Newark, but no. Watson and Sherlock discovered that he had attended a lecture in Newark and was scheduled to attend another lecture in